Welcome to today's Software AG webcast titled ARIS Accelerators for GDPR. Today's program will be presented by Georg Wilhelm, Director of Product Management at Software AG. As we move through today's presentation, I invite you to submit any questions that you may have via the Q&A box, which is located in the top right corner of your WebEx dashboard. We will address your questions at the end of today's program. In the event that we're not able to answer your question, your submission will be recorded, and today's presenter will be back in touch with you as soon as possible. Additionally, today's presentation is being recorded. Should you wish to receive a copy of this webcast, please send an email to the webcast host. Before I turn today's presentation over to Georg, I would like to briefly introduce you to Software AG. Software AG helps companies with their digital transformation. With Software AG's digital business platform, companies can better interact with their customers and bring them on new digital journeys, promote unique value propositions, and create new business opportunities. In the Internet of Things market, Software AG enables enterprises to integrate, connect, and manage IoT components, as well as analyze data and predict future events based on artificial intelligence. The digital business platform is built on decades of uncompromising software development, IT experience, and technological leadership. Software AG has more than 4,500 employees, is active in 70 countries, and had revenues of 872 million euro in 2016. It is now my pleasure to welcome Georg Wilhelm.
Thank you, and welcome from my side. I'm happy to be able to present to you today's webinar about the ARIS Accelerators for GDPR. I will make a PowerPoint presentation, including some live documentation and presentation in the toolings we are using for that purpose. So I'm happy to be able to present this to you. Before we start, of course, GDPR, I would like to give a short overview what the GDPR regulation is, the General Data Protection Regulation, as it is defined by the European Commission. And it unifies the different regulations in regard of data protection that were relevant and in running system in the UE companies, and in the center of this general data protection, the personal data is located. The handling of this personal data for companies will be regulated, and this regulation affects all organizations processing data from EU residents. That means not only European companies are affected, but every company that is working with data, processing or transferring data of these EU residents. The regulation itself will become effective in next year, so time is running short and it's high time to react, and we would like to support companies in preparing for that regulation. The regulation replaces the patchwork of the different data protection rules as they are at the moment running in the different countries of the EU. And in the center of this thing, the rights of the EU subjects is located. So the EU subjects will have a set of additional rights that they can afford companies to react on. They have, for example, the right of access by the data subjects to get the information the companies have about them in their databases. The EU subjects will have a right to be forgotten, a right to obtain consent before the data is used in the companies, the right of data portability, and so on. And due to these different right aspects, there are a lot of obligations for the data processors, meaning the companies working in that context. First of all, we have to prepare the companies that somebody is accountable for this topic, to care about the data protection, and the companies will have to adopt their processes and their IT systems in regard of a set of different other obligations. For example, they have to create the processes and the data collections in a kind of looking after privacy by design and default requirement. They have to be able to report data breaches within a defined period of time. They have to assign data protection officers, and of course they have to run privacy impact analysis within their companies. If they are not able to show that they are working on these topics, high penalties will be possible for them. So every company should take care about this. Okay, that is a general overview, very short, about the GDPR rules. And I would like to give you an overview how we as Software AG can help you on your way to GDPR compliance. We see 4 major steps that are relevant in that context. As the first step of the procedural model we would suggest to run through is that you would have to prepare your organization for that topic. As a very central aspect of the regulation in our point of view and in our experience is that companies will have to provide a record of processing activities, document or storage, and have to run different assessments for these processing activities. Further on, the third step in that rule would be the improvement of the organization, the adoptions according to these new requirements within your company. And of course, the final goal is to ensure compliance with the GDPR regulation. Running through all these 4 process steps, of course, the monitoring capabilities to have a clear overview about the project status and the results of the different steps is very central for a company. And so we are offering our capabilities. Some of them are standard capabilities of our toolings that we are using in that context. We are using ARIS Architect, we are using ARIS Connect, we are using ARIS Risk and Compliance Manager in that context. But we are offering a set of content and of additional elements that can be reused in the GDPR content, and this is called ARIS Accelerators for GDPR. One important element that we are offering in that context is with our new product ARIS Aware, the dashboarding capability, to have the possibility to give a clear overview about your project status and the results within a dashboard. And before I come to this specific step, one main aspect of addressing GDPR in a company is that you will have to be forced to combine a set of different stakeholders in your company and have one single base for all these relevant stakeholders. On the one hand side, of course, we have the legal people in the company, the data protection officer, the compliance managers, but they will have to work together with the business managers, the line of business in the company, because of course these are affected by the different requirements. Furthermore, we have to involve the information technology managers, being responsible for the IT systems and IT architecture and handling of the data in the company. And further on, we also have to include the process managers that define and describe the processes and align them with the respective strategies, IT systems, and so on. So bringing all these different stakeholders with their different set of experiences and different approaches into one single point of truth is one relevant step in our opinion. And to do that, we are using our ARIS products to document the different assets of a company. In the central of this, we are putting the processes as the main basis for every company and enriching this information with additional assets like IT, like data, like requirements coming from norms, like risks, like controls, like policies, and so on. On the way to your GDPR compliance, I already started with the monitoring project status and results. That means, of course, GDPR is not only a project, but often it starts with a project and then comes into a real management system that will have to run during a long period of time, but nevertheless, you will have to have the need for information and actual status about these activities. To do that, we are offering a respective dashboard that shows you the relevant status for the GDPR project and activities. And I would like to give you an overview how this GDPR overview dashboard looks like. It gives a management overview about what we have put into the center, the processing activities as they have to be described according to GDPR regulation, to show how is the status about the documentation of these processing activities, how many new processing activities were documented, were generated, did we have some incidents with our processing activities where we have to raise issues or tasks for that, and so on. To give you a short overview how this looks like in reality, I will now navigate into the system itself. You see our ARIS Connect overview, and I have logged in as John Mansour, being a data protection officer. And as you might see on the left side, we have the different assets that are relevant for our companies in one overview chart. You see the different aspects that are relevant for a company. You have to describe the organizational elements, the processes, your enterprise strategy. Of course, you also have regulations, policies, risks, and data in your company. You have IT systems, capabilities. You can document your products and so on, the technologies in your company. And I will now navigate to the organizational view of our company. To do so, I navigate to an organizational chart. And doing that, I see the information about our example company, All Finance Holding. I can see the overview of this organizational chart. All Finance Holding is a holding that affects or that contains 5 different subsidiaries, 5 different legal entities, the All Insurance, the First Direct, the Headquarters, the Opti Retail, and an investment on Wilhelm Partner Investments. And being responsible for the All Finance Holding, I will navigate to the respective information sheet about this company. And on this information fact sheet, I see the main relevant information about my organizational responsibility about the All Finance Holding Inc. And on a second tab in this information, I can see the relevant dashboard for this legal entity, showing all the relevant information about my GDPR activities. And that helps me, as being a data protection officer, to know exactly the status of the different activities that are running in my company. These dashboards can be enhanced if needed. You can define your own dashboards in addition to this. So what is part of the ARIS Accelerators are 2 predefined dashboards that build a basis according our experience that is to be used in the context. But of course, if additional information is needed, you can adopt or change or create new dashboards accordingly. In this dashboard for the GDPR overview, you see the number of processing activities that are documented for my company. As we are now working on the very first elements of this, there are only 7 processing activities already documented there. You further on see that within the last 14 days, 1 new processing activity was described. I can see this also on a time bar in the dashboard, how many new processing activities were created over the time. And scrolling down, I see the list with all processing activities within my company for the All Finance Holding, and showing the role that we are playing in that context. That means for these processing activities, goal setting, performance management, product adaptations, and so on, I am the controller. Later on in the running system, I would also have the information about the processing activities as they are described and whether some incidents happened in these processing activities. This can be shown on the right side. There you see an overview about processing activities with new incidents. You see the number of all incidents in my legal entity, also the involvement over time about these incidents, and also how this was connected with the processing activities. Okay, that was a short overview about a dashboard, how it could look like in the context of GDPR, showing the status of my project. In addition to this GDPR overview dashboard, we are also delivering an additional dashboard that shows a little bit more the procedural steps that we are supporting with our ARIS accelerators. And as already mentioned, the first big step to do that is preparing the organization. That means we are seeing there four main aspects. On the first hand side, we see the run readiness surveys capabilities. That means to find out where exactly are we standing in our company, where are the needs to take action and so on, according to GDPR regulation. Then taking in the center of our work the processing activities, generation and maintenance. We will have to help you to set up the data, IT and process inventories, and to build out of these the records of processing activities. And then we will enrich these processing activities with additional information. And having done this step, the results will be in a status that the requirements are evaluated, the requirements coming from the GDPR regulation. And furthermore, we will have the records of processing activities report available. This is something that, for example, is a requirement coming out of the GDPR. Well, we're supporting you in definition and description of the different aspects of generating the processing activities and evaluating with 6 main steps. On the first-hand side, we are using questionnaire capabilities to document the processing activities, and we show the status in this process when we have described the processing activities themselves. Additional information has to be gathered, and we can show in a second dashboard how the questionnaire assignment process is happened. We then show where the questionnaires generated for the respective processing activities, and we can show the status of these questionnaires, where they filled out, or are they overdue in time? Are the people working with this? Do we have some results coming out of that? Having documented and evaluated the respective processing activities on a questionnaire level, then will lead to a risk assessment step in the processing activities. For those processing activities, we will have to assign a risk assessment progress. We will then see if these risk assessments are generated, and finally also see the status of this risk assessment. Are the risk assessment executed or not? That helps me to see the progress in our processing activities, documentation and evaluation steps, and this is shown on a second dashboard. Run readiness surveys. Of course, you have to know the GDPR regulation and analyze this. And having put here 4 central elements coming out of the requirements of the GDPR, I would like to show you that these requirements can be evaluated with a set of surveys. For example, if we are looking at the requirement report data breaches, some questions could be, do you have a mechanism or a process that allows you to report data breaches to the supervisory authority? Are you able to inform the data subjects of a personal data breach? And depending on the answers of these questions, you can then see a need of taking action or not. If you have these, Of course, you should be sure that these procedures or mechanisms are working well. But if you do not have them at all, of course, this could be a first step of taking action within your company. The same is true for requirement, for example, like the privacy by design and default, or by the requirement of assigning a data protection officer, or by the requirement that people have a right to be forgotten, and is the company able to fulfill that right? In that context, we are offering, together with a partner, an additional set of questionnaires with already prepared questions. This is delivered by DPG questionnaires, Pathfinder and GDPR. These questionnaires covering aspects on data protection in general, but also a set of questions specifically for the different articles according GDPR. And this can be also bought by software via Software AG as a kind of reference model in addition to the ARIS Accelerators. So this is possible to be reused as predefined content, but of course it is also possible to create your own questionnaires within our tooling, to create questionnaires giving the different answers and collect the information if you are doing that on their own, or if you already have such questions by one of your internal or external companies that are working with you. The regulation itself is also made available in the ARIS Accelerator package. That means we have created a model that shows the regulation itself, including all the different chapters and articles. So you have available the whole regulation in your tool, and you can assign these different articles as a kind of requirement to the respective elements that you are assigning there, be it the questions that are in contact with this specific articles, being it, for example, risks that are affected or are coming out of this requirement, and so on. And you can reuse all this information and align it with your assets in your company repository. How does this look like? I now go back to the live system, switching back to ARIS Connect, and there we see we have a regulation asset. And if I open up that regulation asset, I see the reference model containing the general data protection regulation itself on a different chapter level. I can navigate through the different articles. And for example, if we have a look at Article 30, we can show the respective information and the requirements as they are described in the legislation itself. So this can then be used as a starting point for your activities within the GDPR activities. Okay. In addition to this general data protection regulation, having especially a look at this records of processing activities article as an example, the company has to create such a record of processing activities, and to do that, we need a set of the different information that can be reused to create these processing activities. We are describing the processing activities in a specific modeling capability by combining the respective data elements that are relevant for these processing activities. We can reuse processes or create new process steps as processing activities. We are assigning the respective IT systems that are used in these processing activities. And furthermore, we are also assigning the different organizations, legal entities that are working on these processing activities as processor or as controller. To do that, we are able to reuse but also to document and enhance the different aspects I mentioned. For example, I can create or reuse the data inventory, collecting all the relevant data objects that are relevant in my company, and of course, this data have to be evaluated according their aspects in regard of GDPR, if they are sensitive data, if they are public data or whatsoever. And we have created a set of modeling enhancements, of method enhancements to document this relevant information within the data objects, but also to the IT system and to the processing activities, as well as to the organizational elements. So collecting this information, the data elements, is of course a relevant topic in the context of GDPR. Furthermore, we of course have to create the list of IT systems that are relevant in our context. Here you see the list with all IT systems just in an alphabetical way. As you might see, it is possible to show the different aspects of these assets according to the needs of the people that are working with this. If these people are used to use these elements in a more graphical way, we can show it in a graphical way. If they are more using in a spreadsheet way, we can show all this information, of course, in a more tabular way. And this is one strength of our solution, and we are offering this with the ARIS Connect capabilities. Furthermore, of course, we need the processes, and the processes themselves, of course, can also be documented, the process hierarchy, be it on a graphical way or be it in a textual way. So all this information is used, and then we are offering a specific fact sheet in Connect that is a capability to generate and to gather the information, bringing together all this information, not in a graphical way, but more on a table-based view. And I would like to show how this happens. I now navigate to the record of processing activities for our all finance holding. And you can see there in the textual way, a very simple way of collecting all this information. On the one hand case, of course, you can use this for contribute the information, for publish all the information, but as the data protection officer is not the only one to gather the information, of course, we can include here the different stakeholders, for example, the lines of business, to collect the relevant information. And this is very simple. We can show the existing records of processing activities, and it is possible to add it and to gather all the information in that fact sheet by just pressing this contribute button, and then you can work on the different information. For example, if I would like to add the information to the product retirement process, I can very easily click here and assign the respective all finance holding as relevant element to this processing activity, being the controller. I can also describe the processor. I can describe the IT systems in that way, the input and output data. And this is a very easy way of collecting the information. Which processing activities do we have, and what are the respective roles and data input and IT system to collect all this relevant information to create out of this the record of processing activities. Okay, coming back to the presentation, we have seen this general data protection legislation or regulation as a model. We also saw the different elements the inventories that are used to describe the processing activities, data, IT system processes, and so on. And we are maintaining this in a distributed way via the business managers, for example, with this predefined fact sheet. And this predefined fact sheet, together this information, is also part of the ARIS accelerators for GDPR. Of course, it is also possible to gather all this information on a modeling way. If you have a process or an IT or data architect, he can also collect all this information in a graphical way. If you are using the fact sheet capabilities, then this graphical model is generated automatically in the background and then can be used in the combined repository. In addition to this data, IT systems responsibilities information, we can also add, for example, relevant risks to describe these processing activities, and we can assign predefined surveys to gather additional information about these processing activities. And then these questionnaires are generated automatically in Risk and Compliance Manager, and you can collect this additional information for the processing activities on a very simple and distributed way. I can also show how this looks like. So if you are using these questionnaires, this would give the information for the processing activity according to the requirements of the GDPR regulation, and we are using this information accordingly, and it is filled out by, for example, a business manager or the respective line of business assistant or whoever is responsible or is able to collect this different information. These questionnaires themselves are also predefined, are content of the ARIS Accelerator package, so you can reuse immediately these questionnaires, but of course it is also possible to adopt additional questions, change the answers, add additional categories if needed. This questionnaire itself is just a simple ARIS model that contains all this information, and that is then automatically used as input for generating the respective questionnaires to gather the information. How does this look like? To show that, I have to now switch the system. That was not correct. Log out. And I now would like to log in Risk and Compliance Manager, where we can see how such a questionnaire looks like. I log in as Tom Owen into the system, and there I see a set of different tasks. And now, for example, I have also the task to fill out the questionnaire with the GDPR processing activity documentation. I just click on this simple ID, navigate to the question list, and there see the different questions that have to be filled out by me. I can first give some general comments about the respective information, and then have to maintain the processing activity information, meaning which categories of data subjects are used in that processing activity. Is this public, personal, sensible data? Who are the recipients for this data? Are there recipients in third countries? Are there international organizations that get the data? What's the time limit for erasure? What's the name and contact details of the processor? What categories of processing are happening here? So you can use this information to gather additional information about the processing activity. Okay, coming back to the presentation itself. We are also using here the different information on the organizational elements, to add, for example, the data protection officer information and data protection representative. All these ARIS elements are enhanced with a set of predefined attributes in regard of GDPR relevance and are then used in the context. Having collected all this information, I, John Mansour, as data protection officer, are then able to create the records of processing activities. What I have to do there is just to log in Risk and Compliance Manager, navigate to the respective organizational units, all finance holding, and can there generate the respective reports, record of processing activity, and then in this record automatically all the relevant information that I have to hand over to the supervising authority is available, and I can create this for my company, for my legal entity, and have all this information then available in a respective data. See the table of contents, the information about the all finance holding itself, who is responsible for which element, and of course I can also navigate, for example, to the different processing activities, including the different application systems, the data used in that context, and for example, where I have described this additional information in the questionnaire, I also have available this information in this report. So I can give a whole overview about the processing activities in one single document, including the graphical way of all this information, and have that at hand to hand over to the supervisory authority. Okay. Next step would be the evaluation of the processing activities in regard of whether the data protection impact assessment is needed or not, then the assessment of the DPIA risks, and depending on the results of this risk assessment, I then have to decide whether I have to do this data protection impact assessment and can evaluate the need for improvements and additional measures. The results of this step would be the identification of the high-risk processing activity and would have the risk management reports available. To do that, again, we are using a questionnaire approach to be used on the processing activities, but this data protection impact assessment is done by the legal or DPO environment and not by the business line. And we can evaluate the processing activities in regard of different criteria based on the information gathered before on the processing activities. Furthermore, we can do the data protection impact risk assessment to find out how is the extent of damage or the occurrence frequency within these processing activities, and both of these elements, as well as the questionnaire information, but also this risk assessment information, is then the basis for further activities to find out whether we have to run the respective DPIA or not. How does this look like? Well, again, I can log out John Mansour and log in as Tom Compliance, the one who is doing now the process activity qualification. That means we now have another kind of questionnaire to gather the information, and there we see the assessment in regard of relevant criteria. For example, does the processing activity include any kind of evaluation or scoring, and so on. And we can answer this by simple yes, no answers and giving remarks to this specific questions. We have prepared this questionnaire based on some information that is a best practice to gather this respective qualification of the processing activities as it was defined by the European Commission Working Group. We have involved this into these questionnaires including an additional question, for example, are there reasons for overruling the risk assessment? Has the processing activity already been authorized? And so on. Is that a legal basis that this processing activity has, or is the nature, scope, blah, 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 the processing very similar to the one for which DPIA have been carried out already? So all this information can be gathered in Risk and Compliance Manager. Also, the risk assessment itself can be executed here. We see, for example, here a risk assessment for the risk performance management. I just have to select the GDPR qualification and then have the qualification according how is the extent of damage, insignificant, low, average, high, or very high, and how is the occurrence frequency. And depending on this scoring capability, we can identify those processing activities that need to have an additional and nearer view in regard of doing the respective assessment. Run such a DPIA assessment is done with the ARIS tool itself. That means we would suggest to do that in a workshop together with the business manager, one process or IT architect, and the people from legal to evaluate and document about these high risk marked processing activities. Are there specific controls? Are there policies in place that are used to mitigate the respective risks? If not, we have to raise an issue, and all of this can be done within our tooling of ARIS and ARIS Risk and Compliance Manager. We can use this and document all the relevant information in our tooling and assign additional issues, for example, to document where a need of action is. You can also use this issue management based on the answers of questionnaires to initiate improvement processes or activities for processes, for IT systems, for organizational changes, and so on very easily. So we are offering there an issue management capability to mitigate the respective risk or to improve the company. This is done by just using, for example, ARIS Connect as the publication basis and marking these elements and creating issues that can then be used in the issue management capabilities of Risk and Compliance Manager to show how the respective procedure of the GDPR project is running. Based on this information, we have offered a set of different reports that can be created on either the processing activity or the legal entities that are affected and showcase the respective information in a structured way, showing more or less information, meaning a basis report showing a general information about that processing activity or the legal entity. But we also have an extended report that shows also this information, including the risk assessment, the surveys, and additional information like, for example, occurred incidents within that context. Then we come to the improve your organizational step. That means the mitigation of GDPR risks, the implementation and adaptation of processes and systems for new requirements, and the establishment of the GDPR compliance policies and structures in the organization to implement an incident management system. This can be done with standard capabilities of our tooling, and the results are risk mitigation measures implemented and an incident management system available in your organization. Mitigate the GDPR risks as the different stakeholders have a clear overview about the risks in their area of responsibility, be it the processing activity responsible, the process manager, be it the data or the IT manager or the respective cost center or legal entity responsible. He gets all the information he needs and can initiate the respective issues and tasks to mitigate the risks in their contexts. This is very easy by just marking the elements and then defining, describing the respective issue, assigning responsibilities, who has to care about this and who has to review the respective issue. And you can use this also as a mean to improve your system. Establish a GDPR compliance policy in the organization. Of course, in the long run, there will be a need to not only have clear overview about the processing activities, but also to show that the risks that you have identified are mitigated in a correct way. That can be done with an internal control system capability by showcasing the controls. Are they really working in my company? Do I have respective policies? Do the people know these policies? And finally, of course, we can also offer audit capabilities, how to respectively have regular review about the system. The incident management system with Risk and Compliance Manager, we are able to document incidents on the one hand side for IT elements, IT systems, data elements, but also for processing activities or for organizational elements, and have a clear overview where did these incidents occur and are they documented, and this information can then be used as input for taking additional activities. So with this whole set of different activities, for example, capabilities of testing internal controls and risk mitigation measures, but also capabilities of signing off business processes or organizational hierarchies, and planning and execution of GDPR audits, we would see the capability to build up a complete GDPR management system, if desired, with standard functionality. The main things there, of course, are available in the combination of ARIS Risk and Compliance Manager, sign-off, but also the audit capabilities. And coming back to the set of ARIS GDPR accelerators or ARIS accelerators for GDPR, I would like to collect again the whole information. We have defined a set of new filter to document processing activities, including additional attributes for systems, processes, data, and organizational elements. We can describe processing activities on a very simple way by offering new fact sheets for ARIS Connect for maintaining these processing activities. But of course, it's also possible to use this in the context of pure modeling capabilities. We have defined a set of ARIS and RSCM analysis and management reports that can be used to document and give information about the status. We have an out-of-the-box technical term model with detailed GDPR content, the regulation itself. We have out-of-the-box example questionnaire templates for documentation and qualification for processing activities. We are suggesting a GDPR-specific impact type for risk assessment, and we are offering GDPR-specific dashboards to have a clear overview about the status of your project and the results of your activities. This is how we share the information about how we can support you on your way to GDPR compliance, prepare the organization, evaluate processing activities, and improve your organization. These are the main topics where we are offering our accelerators. A lot of standard functionality is available that can be used out of the box in that context, that does not need any additional configuration or capabilities. And now I'm open to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Georg. So are there any questions in the room? Please feel free to ask your questions in the chat window. So here we have the first question. How is the ARIS Accelerator package delivered?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. We are offering these accelerator elements, so the reports, the fact sheet enhancements, the dashboard, and so on, in a zip file that can be downloaded or can be gathered via the respective sales managers. So this is not part of the ARIS or ARIS System Compliance Manager DVD, but it is an enhancement that can be then downloaded or gathered directly via Software AG. In this zip file, we have also a document that describes exactly how to enrich your ARIS system with the respective information, how to add the additional method enhancements, how to install the dashboard, and all these things into your ARIS system. And all this information is based on the actual version of ARIS, meaning ARIS 10.0 Service Release 2. Additional questions?
There's the next question. Which ARIS products do I need for GDPR package?
Okay. Well, the package contains, as already mentioned, on the one hand side, method enhancements. Of course, these are used in ARIS Architect, so I, in any case, need an ARIS Architect. Further on, we have the respective fact sheets for ARIS Connect. That means for using these fact sheets, I need ARIS Connect, and the dashboards, of course, need, in addition to that, ARIS Aware. And furthermore, we also need the Risk and Compliance Manager to gather all this information via the different questionnaires and the risk assessment capabilities. So the GDPR solution is a real solution about the different ARIS products and bringing together the strengths of each of these elements.
And there's another question. Is the DPG content part of the ARIS Accelerator package?
No, the DPG content, this set of more than 1,000 different questions in regard of data protection and in regard of GDPR, is not part of the ARIS Accelerator. It is a specific enhancement that can be bought via Software AG, but these questionnaires are not part of the ARIS Accelerators themselves, as this is pure Software AG content.
Okay, and one last question. How are Alphabet Business Objects and ARIS Data Objects linked, and can they be shared?
Yes, we have this combination of ARIS and ARIS Alphabet, where we can exchange the process information and the IT systems information. Of course, this can be used together. So on the one hand side, we have the exchange of the IT system information, including the data in respect of this, with the ARIS information. And of course, we can also use this information together in, for example, the different dashboards. And it is possible to navigate out of the ARIS modeling part into ARIS Alphabet to gather there the information for the IT planning aspects and so on. And of course, if there is a need of adopting this in a combined scenario, if you're using ARIS and Alphabet, it is possible to manage all these mitigation procedures or mitigation actions within Alphabet to implement the IT systems in the correct way.
Okay, so I would like to take this opportunity to invite everyone on today's webcast to register for our 2018 ARIS 10 webcast program. This monthly series will examine different ARIS topics and allow you to dive deeper into ARIS as you manage your organization's digital transformation. The first program in this 2018 series, which is titled The Future of Software is on the Cloud, ARIS Cloud Editions Unveiled, will take place on January 11th at 2 p.m. Central Europe time. To register for all of the webcasts in this upcoming series, please visit softwareag.com and look under the Events and then Webinar section of the Company tab. Georg, thanks you very much for your time and presentation today. With that, our program is ended. Enjoy the rest of your day.